Hey, it's Matt, and this time I want to talk about a little controversy that erupted online last week. It centers on a video game called Dragon Quest III HD-2D. And it is a remake of a 1988 video game called Dragon Quest III that was hugely, profoundly popular, influential, massive hit in its time. The Dragon Quest series was an attempt, and a very successful one, to translate what were then the most popular form of computer role-playing games on American PCs into a format that could be played on a console, in this case, the Famicom, which became the Nintendo Entertainment System abroad. The Dragon Quest game series was the brainchild of a man named Horii Yuji, or Yuji Horii, that's actually his name if you say it in the Western pattern, who did a really great job of this. He was inspired greatly by games like Wizardry and Ultima and things like that, and did a great job of taking these games that needed to be played on a keyboard and translated them and to simplify them into a way they could be played with a controller. And Dragon Quest was a massive, massive hit when it came out. By the time the third one rolled around in 1988, there was such hype around it that huge lines formed outside of stores the night before. In Ikebukuro, there was 10,000 people strong waiting out there. And that scene played out all over Japan. And they sold 1 million copies of the game on release day in 1988. It's absolutely incredible. And it was more than a hit. It became a social phenomenon. For a time, it seemed like all of Japan was obsessed with playing Dragon Quest III. They became a new form of leisure activity and even an identity, the gamer. That really emerged in Japan around this time period, and it's very much thanks to Dragon Quest III. And Dragon Quest III is also really notable because while the graphics were pretty simple by modern standards, like a lot of squares and really simple patterns, the packaging and instruction manual were illustrated by one Akira Toriyama, whose name you may know because he passed away this year, but he is the genius-level manga artist who came up with hits like Dr. Slump, Dragon Ball, many other things, huge hits. And he was just coming into his prime in the mid-late 80s when he was asked to do the art for Dragon Quest. By the time Dragon Quest III came out, Dragon Ball had already started being serialized in the pages of Shonen Jump magazine, and this was like adding fuel to this pop cultural fire. It really helped Dragon Quest, the series, and III in particular, blow up into the social phenomenon that it became. So, you have this video game, hugely influential, but pretty outdated. I mean, it's 36 years old. So Square Enix is now re-releasing this game in a new HD-2D format with upgraded graphics that are kind of retro-inspired, but much, much more high resolution and detailed than they were in the original game. And it's coming out very soon. So 2 weeks ago at the Tokyo Game Show, 2 people involved with it participated in a live-streamed podcast sort of thing. One of them was Mr. Torishima, who was Akira Toriyama's editor at Shonen Jump magazine and involved in making the deal between Toriyama and the Enix, the video game company that made Dragon Quest. The other person was none other than Yuji Horii, the creator of Dragon Quest series and, of course, the director of Dragon Quest III. The two of them kind of shot the breeze about all sorts of topics, but at one point the conversation shifted to changes that had been made in this new version of Dragon Quest III as opposed to the one that had been put out 36 years ago. Times change, standards change. One of the big differences is now there's no longer a male-female selection for the player character at the very beginning of the game. You can only select between Type 1 and Type 2. So the gender has been kind of taken away there. And the second thing is the female warrior class, which is one of the player characters you can select. In the original artwork drawn by Akira Toriyama, she's wearing a very, very 80s looking armor bikini outfit. Very revealing. A lot of skin seen on the sides of her body. It's very much a product of its time. It's a very cool illustration. But for the modern version, the illustration has been changed to give the character a kind of sports bra underneath the the chest armor and kind of leggings, short pants leggings underneath the waist bikini, the bottom of the bikini armor. It's really tough to even tell the difference unless you've been told. But the two of them mentioned that these changes had been made and they didn't quite understand why. They just understood that times had changed. Yuji's just like, I guess that's just the way it is these days, and kind of chuckled about it. But then Mr. Torishima said, actually, I think this is because of American religious influences. He described Americans as being Puritans when it came to stuff like this, and that influence was why they were being forced to make changes like this. Now, it's important to note that Mr. Torishima, a legend by any definition, I mean, he was the editor-in-chief of Shonen Jump, manager of Akira Toriyama, just an amazing guy, didn't actually work on the video game. He's just kind of pontificating here. So this was only streamed live, and they took the live stream down really quickly, but somebody recorded a chunk of it, and then they excerpted that one part where they're talking about American Puritanism and the changes made to the game, subtitled it and put it up online. And then somebody on Twitter noticed this and went into this rant about how this is the UN globalist woke agenda. I can't even, it was very much word salad, talking about how Americans are now affecting Japan when it comes to this. They've gone too far, blah, blah, blah. And it probably would have ended there, except Elon Musk then retweeted it and said, wow, this is insane, or something, or whatever Elon Musk says whenever he wades into situations like this. So on the one hand, you have a Japanese creator saying that conservative American religious influences are affecting the game. And then on the other hand, you have American conservatives saying, no, it's American progressives who are affecting the game. The reality of this is that both sides are wrong. Both the Japanese side and or at least Mr. Torishima and the culture warriors who are saying that this is progressives causing these changes made to the game. Before I get into why, I think I should say or explain that I have a little bit of authority to speak on this here. I'm kind of qualified to talk about it because not only did I spend 2 decades working in the localization industry, which is the art of producing foreign language versions of Japanese content, I actually worked on 2 games in the Dragon Quest series, Dragon Quest VII and Dragon Quest VIII. For Dragon Quest VIII, I was part of a team that worked in-house for several months at Square Enix. And at one point, we took a meeting with Yuji Horii. So I've actually met one of the people in this conversation. And I have a lot of insight into the way games are localized and the way decisions are made in Japan and abroad when it comes to presenting Japanese content for foreign audiences. I want to state up front, I was not directly involved in Dragon Quest III HD-2D. So this is not any kind of insider information. This is me sharing with you some thoughts based on decades spent in the profession of localizing Japanese products for foreign audiences. First things first. Did American Puritan values cause the team to make these changes to the game? I don't think so. And here's why. Japan is actually far more restrictive than America when it comes to portrayals of sex and violence. You literally cannot show full frontal nudity in movies or magazines, even those intended for adults. It's against the law. You can and will literally be arrested if you do this. And there was a famous case where a woman released 3-dimensional scans of her private parts online as an art experiment, and she was arrested for it a couple years back. It caused a huge scandal. So Japan is definitely not more free than America when it comes to nudity. When it comes to games, they're even stricter. There is a ratings board called CERO, C-E-R-O, and they are notoriously strict about what they will allow to be shown in each age rating that they give. The coveted all ages rating, the kind of broadest one, is the most difficult and the most restrictive, of course. And in this particular case, it's obvious that the Japanese side wanted to preempt any of this by putting the clothes on the character so that they could get a broader audience. Now, did they do this for the Americans? I don't think so. And the reason why is because Japan is even stricter than the Americans when it comes to censoring games. In fact, a lot of American games that come over to Japan are censored in very real ways. For instance, Baldur's Gate 3, which features a character selection screen where the bodies of the player characters are actually naked, they put digital fig leaves over the crotches of them there. This is not really a big deal, but there are instances of actual big cuts. For instance, The Last of Us 2. The Last of Us is in the headlines right now because the series was so great on HBO and a new one is coming out. But the second one in the game franchise features a sex scene between two characters. That was totally cut for the Japanese version. No censoring or no editing, cut. Just completely cut out from that. And then there's the case of the Grand Theft Auto games, which kind of glorify violence in a lot of ways. This is seen as very not cool in Japan, and the changes made to Grand Theft Auto San Andreas in particular were so deep that they actually affected gameplay to the point where it's almost impossible to clear a bunch of the missions. They rebalanced the game, they made the police stronger, they made the character weaker, especially when he's doing things like attacking enemies or opponents when they're on the ground. Just fundamental changes to the game that make it a completely different sort of game. And it's not only limited to imported games in Japan. Final Fantasy XII featured a scene where there was a kidnapping. And at the time that game came out in Japan, there was a big case involving a real-life kidnapping in all of the headlines. And I guess the creators felt like it wouldn't be good to have that kind of scene in a game when this was a big topic in the mass media. And so they elected to cut that scene out from the Japanese version. But it is in the foreign versions. So the point of all of this is to say that Japan is not some land of total, absolute free speech and creativity. There's actually more restrictions on creators here that have absolutely nothing to do with religion or outside influences at all. So the idea that some cabal of woke, quote unquote, or globalist, quote unquote, forces are somehow compelling Japanese creators to compromise their vision, to change what they want to portray, is absolutely not the case. And I can tell you, speaking personally, from decades spent in the localization industry, that politics are the furthest thing from most of our minds when we're working on this, or they certainly were for us. And more to the point, localizers and translators, they're not gatekeepers. We do not get final say on what shows up in the game. It's not our game. It's the director's game. And more to the point, it's the company's game. They are the one putting all of the money into these products. And they want and need to make that money back. So quite often, changes will be made to match what local mores are, what the local values are. Some changes will be made to appeal to that. Or they'll be made in Japan. The act of creating something is a constant balancing act between some ideal that you have in your head and what you can actually portray for whatever reason. You see this all the time in the American film industry, where somebody makes a movie that they intended to be rated R, but the film company insists that it be cut down to be PG-13. Is this censorship? No. It's capitalism. That's what this is. It's what it is with Dragon Quest III, HD-2D. It's what happens when movies are released with certain ratings, with games released with certain ratings. All of these companies want to make money first and foremost. They literally do not care about politics. They certainly don't care about the American culture wars. And that was made very, very clear when the radio show that streamed this conversation that happened at the Tokyo Game Show 2 weeks ago released a statement after this whole thing had blown up online saying this was taken out of context. None of the participants in this are trying to ally themselves with any specific political group, nor are they trying to deny it. It seems like a kind of mushy mouth statement, but let me translate it for you. Let me localize it for you. It means we don't want any part of this culture war. We just want to make games and we want you to buy them. So that's it for this time. If you want more information on this, I wrote a much more in-depth essay about it. It's on my newsletter. I'll put a link to it down below. And if you're interested, I'll also put some links to other localization-related conversations that you might find interesting. This is a subject near and dear to my heart. Localization is it's not only how I made my living here, it's why I decided to learn Japanese. I wanted to master the language so I could help other people appreciate the same kind of content that brought me to Japan in the first place. So it makes me very sad when I see conversations online that portray localizers or translators as gatekeepers, censors, or even some kind of enemy. We really aren't. We love this stuff as much as you do, and we want you to appreciate it as much as we do. So just something to keep in mind whenever you see kind of heated rhetoric about localization. It's not as simple as most people like to make it out to be, and the people involved in it are not demons. They're here to help, really, truly. And if you want to know more about this, you feel free to ask questions down in the comments below. And if there's enough of them, I'm happy to do another sort of video like this that's just about localization, because again, it's a topic near and dear to my heart. Thank you very much. Please stay tuned for more content like this. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this or to my newsletter or both, and I will catch you next time. Thanks a lot.